Why should we, or why should adults, children, read graphic novels?
But there are a number of benefits when it comes to studying graphic novels. And when we say that in the plural. Even just taking one, just as like a change of pace, can make a huge difference to any student in the classroom, because the clue is in the name. They are very much a visual medium as opposed to traditional text. So anyone who is a visual learner, they're going to be able to engage in it much more easily, just like when doing film, when you can see a character's expression, when you can see the background, when you can see the setting, as opposed to having to visualize it off your own back, which can be quite difficult for some students. That kind of legwork is taken off the shoulders of the student, and they can focus on the more minute details as they're reading through the story. In terms of accessibility as well, a lot of students, as we've probably come across, they just don't like to read, whether it was never ingrained in them when they were younger, whether they find books quote unquote boring, it just doesn't appeal to them. Whereas a graphic novel, which is such a change of pace from a traditional novel, that can capture their attention in a way that's a classic from 60 years ago will not.
Do we have students who are studying English as an additional language? In the early days, we have many benefits then of using the graphic novel. There won't be a word overload for them. While they may not know every word on the page, it'll still be less than the traditional novel. And as well as that, we have a little piece of visual stimulation there for them. So if they don't know what the word is, by trying to decode what the image attached to it is, they will then be able to break down over time what these words mean, even if they don't fully get them in the first stage.
Yeah, precisely. That term reading between the lines gets thrown out a lot when trying to decode some of the narrative in a traditional book. If you come across a phrase or a word, even like a slang term or colloquialism, and it just goes over the heads of a student that maybe is learning English as a foreign language, or even has English as a first language and still just doesn't understand it, the context on the page, the visualization that goes along with it, seeing the actions and the body language of the speaker or the person being spoken to, is going to make it a lot easier to parse through this difficult language that they're being presented with.
Which ones then do you feel should be studied on the curriculum?
There are a few top contenders deserve to be considered for the junior cycle. And I've got a couple of recommendations depending on whether you're dealing with a first year group or if you're looking at a second and third year group, whether the graphic novels can actually be studied for the purpose of being examined. To start off with a first year group, the Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman was adapted into a graphic novel by P. Craig Russell. And this could be a nice text to start off with, something to introduce them to the format, especially maybe if they've read the book. If maybe you did extracts of the Graveyard Book with the class and then did a comparison with the graphic novel version. That could be interesting to compare and contrast, to see what scenes maybe provided more detail or context, depending on if it was the text version, which is obviously very descriptive, or in the graphic novel version, which is very visual and maybe loses some subtlety in the text, but kind of gains some extra detail in the background, in the facial expressions, etc. So the Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman is a fantasy novel aimed at children. So this story follows an orphan by the name of Nobody Owns, who was raised in the graveyard by a pair of ghosts and a vampire. While the narrative is unfolding, the killer of his parents is trying to find him and to finish the job off. He's like the last of his family line, and he is trying to survive. There is quite a bit of scale and scope to this story. It is a Neil Gaiman story at the end of the day, so that is kind of to be expected. And the whole kind of multi-world story that is unfolding gets a lot of detail in the original text through Neil Gaiman's language and his descriptions, but also gains a lot of visual flair in the graphic novel version as well. So as I was saying before, this story in particular, a fantasy story, is going to gain a lot maybe from a compare and comparison exercise. For example, those students you mentioned earlier who maybe do not enjoy reading, they don't find it beneficial, maybe they weren't exposed to it when they were younger. A lot of fantasy or sci-fi stuff can get shrugged off as being stupid to them. Just they don't find them appealing, they don't see the point of them, etc. We've heard these kind of statements before from students. Being able to actually see it is maybe going to unlock something where they can actually maybe appreciate what the author is going for, rather than have to do the legwork of coming up with fantastical settings and worlds which they may not be used to doing. Having it in front of them is going to give them a jump start in engaging with the text, which maybe isn't necessary for other students, but everyone will be on the same level playing field here if we're doing a compare and contrast exercise.
What text would you go with just to reintroduce a graphic novel so that it's still fresh for second or for third years?
I'm glad that you mentioned second years at the start of a new year particularly, because this one summer by Mariko and Gillian Tamaki, so this was a kind of joint effort by two people, is a coming of age graphic novel, which is set during the summer at the beach. And this main character, Rose, has spent every year at the summer. And this particular one that has just gone past, her parents cannot stop arguing. It's a very tense kind of year for her, a very tense summer, and she's looking for a distraction. Instead of fun, she finds trouble instead. So this is a coming of age story set during the summer, with students who are already familiar with the format may quite be able to engage with it. Just coming off the summer, late August, early September, The sun is still going to be out for maybe a few days rather than a few weeks here in Ireland. This kind of narrative might try and recapture some of those summer months, that kind of feel, the sun, the beach, the sea, etc. That we're all going to be missing, not just the students, but the teachers as well. So we're all going to be crying out for a bit more of that, even if it is in full colour glory in a book.
Go about activities and getting them specifically to create their own graphic novel.
One activity could be done, and this was suggested to me by a colleague, for about taking, say, a set page, cutting up the panels. A very high esteemed colleague. I just can't think of his name off the top of my head. Cutting up the panels and then making it the job of the student to rearrange them in the correct order. The caveat being the speech bubbles are blank. So they need to use context clues. They need to look at the body language of the character to see who is speaking, who has spoken, who is looking like they're getting ready to speak, etc., and trying to organize them into the correct order. That could be done. Another one, and I will now credit you for this. This was William Byrne who came up with this idea, giving the students the job of filling in blank speech bubbles. And this can be tricky because it isn't as simple as, just coming up with new dialogue. Because the speech bubbles are accompanying like an actual shot, there are characters in the shot. The body language is going to point. You can't have someone spouting an angry dialogue if they look very calm, they look very serene, etc. Same way, you can't have someone speaking very serenely if they've got their fists raised and their face is all contorted into like an angry expression. So reading facial clues, reading body language, etc. It makes it more difficult to come up with that dialogue. But if they're able to do that, then it's kind of proof that they fully comprehend the format and they understand how it works.